She didn't understand your silence at first. When you stopped explaining yourself, when you stopped reacting, she thought you were being cold, maybe even arrogant. But what she couldn't see back then was that your silence wasn't rejection, it was power. You had learned that not every emotion deserves a reaction, not every argument needs a defense, and not every connection is meant to be forced. You carried a calmness that confused her because she had never met a man who could love deeply yet remain grounded when things fell apart. She mistook your peace for distance because she was used to chaos being a sign of care. She expected pleading, chasing, or desperate words, but what she received was stillness. And in that stillness, something began to shift. When you stopped reaching out, she was forced to listen to the echo of your absence. The quiet she once criticized became the sound of truth. It made her think about all the moments you spoke without words, the way your actions always matched your intent, the way you didn't promise, you proved. Only now does she realize that your silence was never about indifference. It was about self-respect. You weren't trying to punish her, you were protecting your peace. She replays those last conversations, the tone of your voice, the calm in your eyes. There's something haunting about a man who walks away not because he's angry, but because he's finally at peace with what he can't control. That realization unsettles her. She thought she held the power when you stopped talking, but in truth, that was the moment she lost it. For the first time, she had to sit with her own thoughts without your reassurance. And in those quiet moments, she began to see the truth. Your silence was saying everything she refused to hear. Now she finds herself wondering what you're doing, who you've become. She won't say it out loud, but your calm detachment lives in her mind. It reminds her of what she took for granted, the consistency, the presence, the grounded energy that once made her feel safe. What used to frustrate her now fascinates her. The same man she thought was too still, too composed, now seems like the kind of strength she never truly appreciated. Time has a way of revealing what emotion hides. The longer she sits with the memory of your silence, the clearer it becomes. You weren't distant, you were decisive. You weren't cold, you were controlled. And that difference is everything. She sees now that the quietest men often speak the loudest through their discipline, their actions, their restraint. Your silence told her the truth she didn't want to face, that love without respect isn't love at all, and that a man who can walk away peacefully is a man who has already won his battles within. In the end, she doesn't whisper your name with regret, she whispers it with recognition, because she finally understands what your silence meant. She used to think your distance meant you stopped caring, but deep down, something inside her knows that's not true. What confuses her most is the way you moved on, not in bitterness, not with resentment, but with quiet acceptance. You didn't chase her, you didn't try to prove your worth, and you didn't try to convince her to stay. You simply let her go. That kind of calm detachment is rare, and it speaks volumes. It tells her that you have something most men don't, emotional control. And that control is what she now secretly admires and misses. Because while she tried to provoke a reaction, you gave her none. You became the reflection of her own choices, and that unsettled her more than any words ever could. You see, when a man stops reacting emotionally, he takes back his power. That's when she starts to question herself. She starts to wonder why your energy no longer revolves around her. She can sense the shift even in silence. When you stopped giving her attention, the dynamic changed completely. She felt the void, not because she lost you, but because she lost the validation your presence once gave her. That's the moment curiosity turns into longing. She begins to notice how her own emotions feel heavier without your calm to balance them. The same man she called too cold now feels like the peace she can't find anywhere else. Your emotional discipline didn't just protect you, it revealed her. It showed her what real strength looks like, not the kind that tries to control others, but the kind that controls itself. You weren't running from emotion, you were mastering it, and that's something she never expected from you. Because for her, emotions have always been a battlefield, a way to test love, a weapon to see who cares more. But you stepped off that battlefield, and the moment you did, she lost her power over you. Now, she sees that calmness doesn't mean you stopped feeling, it means you stopped allowing feelings to rule you. And that realization doesn't come easily. It keeps her awake sometimes, scrolling through your old photos, remembering your voice, the steadiness in your tone when everything was falling apart. That kind of strength doesn't fade from memory, it lingers. Because deep down, every woman desires a man who can lead himself, who doesn't get lost in emotions but walks through them with discipline. You became that man, and in doing so, you showed her what it truly means to be grounded. So while she may never admit it out loud, she respects you now in a way she never did before. The distance that once made her question you now makes her crave your presence. Because a man who can master himself doesn't need to chase validation, he becomes the validation. And that quiet power, that's what she whispers about when no one's listening. She never expected that your silence would be louder than any words you could have spoken. When you stopped explaining yourself, when you no longer tried to make her understand how much you cared or how deeply she hurt you, something shifted inside her. At first, she mistook your quietness for indifference, thinking you had simply stopped feeling. But as days turned into weeks, she began to realize that your silence carried weight. It wasn't emptiness. It was strength. It wasn't that you didn't care anymore. It was that you had finally learned that not everything needs to be said. Some truths reveal themselves through absence, and in your absence, she started hearing her own thoughts echoing back. She replays the moments where you would once respond instantly to her messages, where you would go out of your way to make her feel seen, and now, the stillness feels unfamiliar. That constant attention she once took for granted is gone, and as much as she tries to convince herself that she's moved on, she can't deny that the quiet bothers her. Because it's in that silence that she faces something she never wanted to admit, that she pushed away someone who genuinely cared. She begins to understand that you're not being cold, you're being calm. You're not being distant, you're being disciplined. And that difference hits harder than anger ever could. Your silence has become a mirror reflecting her own actions. When she looks into it, she sees how her ego once led her to test you, to see how far she could push before you'd break. But you didn't break, you simply stepped back. You stopped fighting battles that drained your peace. You stopped explaining your worth to someone who refused to see it. That's when she starts to miss the version of you that always showed up, always cared, always forgave. But now, you've changed, you've built your peace in solitude, and the more she realizes that, the more she feels your absence like a presence. There's something powerful about a man who can walk away without hate in his heart. Your silence isn't revenge, it's resolution. You've accepted what happened, and that acceptance is what unsettles her the most. Because now, you no longer need closure, validation, or even her recognition. You've detached not to hurt her, but to heal yourself. That kind of silence speaks to her soul, even if she never admits it. It tells her that you've grown beyond needing her approval. You've become the kind of man whose peace can't be disturbed by temporary emotions. And deep down she feels it. Your silence has become her teacher. It shows her that losing you wasn't about your disappearance. It was about her inability to value you when you were present. Because sometimes the loudest realization comes not through arguments or explanations, but through the quiet distance of a man who finally chose peace over pain. She never realized how deeply your presence had shaped her world until she noticed the void your absence left behind. When you were around, she thought your attention would always be there, constant, unshaken, like a steady flame that never flickered. But now that flame is gone, and what she feels is not just loss, but a quiet ache that lingers in unexpected moments. She catches herself scrolling through old messages, revisiting conversations that once felt ordinary but now hold the weight of nostalgia. Your laughter, your calm tone, your patience. They replay in her mind like echoes from a time when she didn't understand their value. It's in these small moments that she begins to realize that your energy wasn't something she could replace or find again easily. What she once called predictable, she now calls peaceful. What she once ignored, she now longs for. You became a memory that refuses to fade because it wasn't just about attraction. It was about the feeling of being understood, of being seen without judgment. And now, with you gone, she feels the absence of that emotional grounding. You see, she thought she wanted excitement, challenge, and games to keep things interesting. But now, as she faces the emptiness left behind, she understands that calmness was what made her feel truly safe. It wasn't the thrill she needed, it was the stability you brought. And that realization quietly humbles her. Time has a way of revealing truths that emotions once blinded us from. While you've moved forward, learning to prioritize your peace, she's left revisiting the past, trying to understand where it all began to fade. Your silence now acts as a contrast to her noise, the overthinking, the what-ifs, the restless nights filled with thoughts of what could have been. She begins to see that what she once perceived as your coldness was actually your restraint, your ability to remain calm in situations that would have broken most people. She misunderstood your control for indifference, not realizing that it came from emotional maturity and self-respect. Now, she compares every interaction to the way you once made her feel, the subtle confidence, the patience, the strength in your calmness. Every man who comes after feels slightly off, slightly lacking, because they don't carry that same depth. That's the unspoken truth she whispers only to herself, that no matter how much she tries to move on, there's something about you she can't let go of. You became the standard without trying to be. You didn't chase validation, you embodied value. And though she may never say it out loud, deep down she knows she lost something rare. Not a man who was desperate for her attention, but one who was at peace within himself. That kind of presence lingers long after it's gone, reminding her that the calm she once called boring was actually the peace she now craves. There comes a moment when she finally realizes that what she thought was indifference was actually strength. Your calmness, your distance, your quiet detachment, all of it begins to make sense to her in ways it never did before. She starts to understand that you weren't cold, you were composed. You weren't avoiding her, you were protecting your peace. In the beginning, she mistook your silence for a lack of care, your emotional discipline for ego, and your space for disinterest. But now, as the noise fades and her emotions settle, she starts to see it differently. She realizes that your ability to stay centered, even when she tried to provoke a reaction, wasn't weakness. It was control, the kind most people never master. Every time she tried to push you away, she expected you to chase her, to prove your devotion, to validate her importance. But when you didn't, when you simply let her walk away without resistance, that moment planted a seed in her mind. It's only now, in your absence, that seed has grown into realization that your calmness wasn't a lack of passion, but a reflection of self-awareness. You understood something she didn't love isn't proven by chaos, it's revealed through peace. And that peace, which she once found confusing, has now become the very thing she misses. She replays those moments where she tried to get a rise out of you, the arguments, the silent treatments, the subtle tests, and remembers how you never lost your center. She remembers how you didn't beg, didn't fight to convince her to stay. You simply stayed true to yourself. That stability, that emotional restraint is what now keeps echoing in her thoughts. It's rare, she realizes, to find someone who doesn't get pulled into the emotional storms we create out of insecurity. You didn't try to win, you chose to remain grounded. And now, that's exactly what makes you unforgettable. She begins to understand that true strength doesn't come from control over others, but from mastery over oneself. You mastered the art of detachment not as a weapon, but as a form of wisdom. You knew that chasing someone who doesn't see your worth only weakens your own value. Your stillness, your decision to walk away with quiet dignity, forced her to see herself, to face her own patterns, her own fears, and her own immaturity. She sees now that while she was playing emotional games, you were living with purpose. You didn't need to prove anything because you already knew who you were. And that's the truth that haunts her the most, that while she was seeking validation, you were seeking peace, and peace won. The very calmness she once ran from is now the presence she can't stop missing. In the end, she realizes too late that your silence was never empty, it was full of meaning, wisdom, and strength. In the end, what she whispers to herself isn't about your looks, your charm, or even your confidence. It's about how you made her feel. She remembers how your presence carried a sense of peace she couldn't quite understand back then. You weren't just another man chasing validation or begging for attention, you were different. You were the calm in the middle of chaos, the grounded energy that made her feel both safe and challenged at the same time. Now, in your absence, she realizes that what she truly craves isn't the excitement of the games or the drama she once found thrilling. It's the emotional stability that came from being around you. That quiet, composed presence that never tried too hard but always stood firm in its value. As time passes, she begins to see that your distance wasn't rejection, it was reflection. You weren't trying to punish her, you were simply choosing not to lose yourself in the process of loving someone who didn't yet understand love. That's what separates you from the rest. Your ability to remain compassionate without being consumed, to care deeply without surrendering your peace. She feels the weight of that now. Every conversation she has, every interaction with others reminds her of what she lost. No one else carries that same calm energy. No one else makes her feel that sense of trust and quiet strength. What she once called coldness was really your wisdom. You understood that relationships built on chasing, on emotional games, or on fear of loss never last. You knew that real connection requires space. Space for respect, space for self-awareness, space for growth. And while she was still learning to understand that, you had already mastered it. That's why she thinks of you late at night, in moments when the world goes quiet and her distractions fade. She whispers your name not out of longing for possession, but out of realization. Realization that she finally sees what she couldn't before. She sees that you didn't disappear out of pride, you disappeared out of principle. You chose silence over chaos, detachment over desperation. And that decision, though it confused her at first, now earns her deepest respect. She knows now that men like you don't come around often, men who can walk away not because they stopped caring, but because they started valuing peace more than approval. It's this understanding that stirs something deep within her. A mix of admiration, regret, and desire. She craves that peace again, that energy again, but she knows it's not something she can just ask for, something she has to become worthy of. And so she keeps it to herself, that truth she'll never say out loud, that the man she once thought was too cold is the very man who warmed her heart the most, not through words or promises, but through presence and discipline. And deep down, she knows she'll never meet someone quite like you again.